Batya and Brianna, welcome to Honestly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. This is such an honor. I'm so excited to get to know Batya better in YouTube area. This is going to be great.
Okay, brunettes, let's dive in. Before we get to the incoming administration, we need to cover a story that I really didn't expect us to be covering, although maybe, the people that pay close attention to nature and rain and incompetency in California governance would not be so surprised. And of course, I'm talking here about the California fires, since that is the thing on mine and I'm sure yours and everyone's mind. These are the most destructive fires in Los Angeles's history. As we record, 24 people have died. That number is sure to go up. More than 12,000 homes, businesses, and buildings have been damaged or destroyed. There are whole parts of Los Angeles that seem like a nuclear bomb has been set off. And lots of people are pointing lots of fingers. And I wanted to start by just asking, who's to blame here? And Batya, I thought maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, you're seeing, people on the left kind of blaming the climate change issue and people on the right blaming, DEI or incompetence. I feel pretty grossed out by both of these trends. I think Leighton Woodhouse really nailed it in a piece he wrote for Newsweek and also in the Free Press, where he argued that there's just something about the geology of this place that lends itself to these horrific acts of God every half a century, that the land there, around the Santa Monica Beach, Pacific Palisades should never have been developed because it was always going to erupt in flames in this way due to, the fact that the vegetation grows really lush during the rainy winter months and then dries out and the Santa Ana winds show up in the dry summer months. And so to me, I found that really compelling. I just think it is so hard to imagine somebody doing a better job with so much destruction. I don't have any confidence in Karen Bass or in Gavin Newsom. I don't think that they're stars or particularly competent people. But at the same time, nobody's pointing to things that are legitimate as, actual mistakes that would have actually prevented this or helped the situation. From what I've been able to gather, and, your listeners should tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the reason there was no water in the hydrants was not because there is an absence of water for this kind of thing, but because the water pressure was simply failed because they were trying to get all of the water in the city into one place, which is something that is very predictable, but I don't know how you fix for it. So to me, I feel like the politicization of this has been extremely disappointing. But I do think that on the ground, there's been a lot of unity and a lot of coming together, a lot of really moving moments on social media. So I'm trying to focus on those.
I'll say here that the piece that you referenced by Leighton Woodhouse has elicited more anger from very thoughtful people than perhaps any story we've run in the past few months. I want to just read part of a letter that we're going to run tomorrow because I think it'll take us a little deeper into this conversation. Leighton Woodhouse's piece is a revolting example of the defeatism that permeates far too much of civil society today. It's the same philosophy animating low birth rates, climate inevitability, and racial determinism. Taken to its logical conclusion, Woodhouse's argument is that because Earth is part of a solar system that faces black holes, asteroids, and an eventual implosion on the sun, we should merely hang our heads and mutter goodbye to our lineage as the natural process of destruction takes place. In other words, there's a kind of determinism and defeatism in the argument that, well, Los Angeles is built to burn. In other words, you could say the same thing. Manhattan is built to flood. We're surrounded by water. The entire idea of building cities and civilization is the idea that we push back against nature. So maybe I'm getting too heady for before noon on a Monday, but I got to say, having lived in LA over the past 4 years, having seen the way that the basic compact between citizens and the government does not work. You cannot, if you call the LAPD because there you see a robbery, or in my case, see a man wildly swinging a machete, it might take them an hour to show up. Living in New York feels like this utopian paradise in terms of just functionality compared to Los Angeles. So those fires are taking place in that political context, one in which things that should be public are increasingly privatized, and in which people have really lost faith in the mayor and in the governor. But I've gone on too long. I'm meant to be the host. Brianna, what do you think? Who's to blame?
I think it's so interesting because I think, Batya, you're being a little bit more generous on the Democrats than I would be, and this is what I would say. When I ran for Congress here in Massachusetts, I got a front row seat to what happens with one party governance. And I think it really opened my eyes for a lot of things because Massachusetts, I think this is a great place to live. But when it comes to some of our congenital problems that we just don't seem able to solve, like housing or public transportation, the problem is the political system because Democrats are the only ones that win functionally. It's all set up to reward fealty to power. And I think LA is this problem on steroids as well as best as I can tell. I actually flew out of LA the day that the fire started. I was out there, and before it, I had a tweet that went viral, just talking about how difficult it was to see the city degrade over the last 15 years I've been visiting there. Like homelessness is through the roof. I saw people shooting up drugs on the street. Like it was really, really surprising to me. So, I think you're dead on that I agree with the free press piece when you're saying the core problem is ecological, but that piece also tells stories about people not getting alerts on their phone when, we get an alert every time a senior citizen goes missing. So no matter what, I think there is a crisis of confidence in our elected leaders, and the trust has been broken that they're on our side. And I think that goes for Democrats particularly.
Let's talk about the political implications of this, not politicizing the fires themselves, but the implications. Trump tweeted, "One of the best and most beautiful parts of the United States of America," and I can attest to that, it's really paradise, "is burning down to the ground. It's ashes, and Gavin Newsom should resign. This is all his fault." 2 weeks from now, Karen Bass, will she be in or out? Gavin Newsom, what's his fate? He's long wanted to run for the presidency. Are those dreams over because of this fire?
That was my first thought. This is the end of his political career. I don't see how he survives this. And that sounds like a contradiction with what I opened with, but I don't think it is. It could be that something is just so devastating that your inability to respond to it in a way that's compelling ends your political career, even though there would have been very little you could have done. And obviously, like if Governor, DeSantis had been in charge of LA, I think people would have felt like there was more competence going on around them, because I agree, of course, with both of you that the contract in California has been broken and that there's a huge crisis in trust in public institutions. I just think that this was an act of God and was so devastating for these ecological reasons that it seems sort of almost unfair. The Karen Bass being in Ghana, that was an unforced error that led to this perception that the people in charge were not worthy of the trust of the public. And they have earned that in a million different ways. I just don't think that I certainly, through all of my research, have not been able to come up with a better plan for how they could have handled this. But it may sink their careers. I think that that's very likely.
Here's one of the lessons, I'll put my cards on the table, that I draw from this. Government in LA and in many blue cities across the country has lost sight of the most basic parts of their job, which is keeping people safe from crime, safe from, majorly drug addicted people harassing them on the street, safe in this case from natural disasters like wildfires, or if not safe, at least prepared. And instead, they have focused on, what Rob Henderson might call luxury issues or niche boutique issues that have very little to do with the basics of governing. Is that going to be one of the kind of political takeaways from this?
I want to say something really quickly because I really want to hear what Brianna has to say about that. 20 people have died, I believe. Is that correct? That's the number.
24 so far, but it's definitely going to go up.
24 people so far have died, and we mourn every single one of them. Horrific tragedy. Most of them were seniors and disabled people who couldn't get out. It's horrifying. When you look at the scope of the damage, people were informed. People got out. I mean, if you had asked me, looking at that landscape, that apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, burnt out landscape, how many people I would have thought would have died. And again, God forbid, I'm not minimizing these horrific deaths. I would have expected it to be in the hundreds, if not the thousands. So I do think that there's a point of view and we're talking about, you think about the neighborhoods like the Pacific Palisades. I've been reading a lot about this. A lot of these towns are built. There's one road going into an area where 2,500 people live. The cars, they had to flee their cars and survived fleeing their cars because the trees on either side of the road were engulfed in flames. So really miraculous survival of many, many people. And again, God forbid not to undermine the deaths, but it does seem like people's lives were very much saved. There was a lot of property damage, and of course that's terrible, but I just wanted to make that point.
So where does your calculation come in that Gavin Newsom is going to have long-term damage from this? Because I think if we've seen anything over like political history, like I think all of us have learned that the American people tend to have short memories, right? So like how do you get from A to B? How do you think this is going to, and look, cards on the table. I'm friends with multiple people that I'm sure are going to run for president, in 2028. We've had a lot of conversations about Gavin Newsom and the risk, what his vulnerabilities are. And I do think that there's an opening here. But I'm curious, like from your perspective, how do you get from A to B where in 2028, after 4 years of Trump, he's not going to be competitive when he's one of the very best communicators that we have?
Because I think a lot of the donor base that would have supported him are now homeless. You can either sort of, really upset the middle class of the Democratic Party, or you can upset the sort of rich donor class. And I think a lot of the people who would have been that support against the bulwark of the sort of middle class and working class neighborhoods that went up in flame are now homeless and uninsured for their $20-30 million homes. And I don't think that they are going to forgive him for this, even if it's not necessarily his fault, especially when you're going to have such a crowded field of so many people who are not associated with being on TV at the time that their homes were burning.
I could also make the argument, though, from the, sure, there's the wealthy donor class perspective on it, but there's also, Altadena, this is not Malibu. This is not the Palisades. Like, these are solidly middle class people. And if I'm them, and if my home is just burned to the ground, oh, and by the way, I'm thinking about this guy who went to the French Laundry or whatever it was in the middle of COVID. Someone can fact check me on that, but I think memory serves.
Oh, that was right.
Yeah. Like, why am I voting for the person, that is so out of touch with my everyday concerns? Just as an example, though, of like, I've sort of been, there's been a lot that we've published and a lot of commentary, I think, over the past since the election in November on the vibe shift, right? Yeah. Culturally and politically, and the woke is fading, people are moving to the right. You guys know this conversation. One piece of evidence just of how quickly things can shift is Maria Shriver, hardly a Republican conservative, is on Twitter talking about how Los Angeles and California needs radical change in the wake of this. I have friends in LA, progressives, texting me, I guess I'm a Republican now. In other words, they are so fed up. It's not that they're Republican on any particular policy issue. It's that they are so disgusted, Brianna, with, one party rule and the corruption of it, that they're just like, done. I'll vote for anything else that's not this. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think that really brings me into, I hope as we do this, like this is a point I really want to hammer. So I don't know, like we all remember Y2K. Y2K was a problem with technical debt. We made some decisions in the 80s and 90s, and we had to pay for it when the millennium came because our computers were going to crash. There's a term for this, it's called technical debt. The Democratic Party has serious silliness debt built up. And the silliness debt is focusing, even for me as a trans woman, on trans policy and pronouns and a whole bunch of, like there was a clip that went viral with someone like, doing sign language in front of a press conference from this, even though, teleprompters are built in. We focus so much on these superficial, silly issues that do not make working class people's lives better. And this is what, Batya, you've focused on like a laser, and your analysis is dead right about that. So Barry, this is my analysis. When Trump won, I was really heartened because the conversations I was having with Democratic insiders were very much, how do we get back in touch with working class people? How do we put some of these silly issues aside? How do we get back to basics again? And what is really terrifying me is today, as we're recording this, I'm already seeing it just get back to the same playbook, which is anti-Trump, deny everything, just point out that he's bad. This is a losing playbook for us. So I think
But how can this be yoked to, how can this possibly, I'm sure there's a way, how can this possibly be yoked to Trump?
No, you can't. It's impossible. But what I'm saying is, like, look at what happened with Gavin Newsom, right? He had a tete-a-tete on Twitter with Trump. It was the silliness on that. You don't even believe in climate change. Does this help anyone get their house back? What people are going to find in LA as they are trying to rebuild is running into the residential zoning permit issue. This is going to make people so mad at their local government. And it's like either the Democratic Party can wake up and understand that people like us less than they like Trump, which is honestly scary, and we can change and we can get back to basics. And I think California is a real opportunity to do that. So my assessment is if we wake up, if we handle this crisis well, this can be a moment that it's a new Democratic Party working together, or we can go back to the same old way of doing business, which is fealty to power and politicians thinking about their next election. And unfortunately, I think the latter is more likely.
Hey guys, Barry here. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the latest episode of Honestly. If you want to watch the full conversation and support the work that we do here at the Free Press of fearless, independent journalism, subscribe today at the top link in this video's description, or just go to thefp.com/join.